Hello there. This is Dr. J. Kent Gregory again, and we are continuing with our discussion of Chapter 3 from Rothermel's Strategic Management, and it's entitled External Analysis. And this will be part 3, the final part, and we'll discuss an industry competitive structure, exit barriers, and strategic groups. So for the industry competitive structure, uh, there's a continuum that goes from fragmented all the way to consolidated. So in terms of fragmented, we have, perfect competition, and then as we progress, monopolistic competition, and then oligopoly, and then monopoly, where there's only one. So features of the various ones, in perfect competition, there are many small firms. The firms are price takers, so they focus on price. The product is a commodity product, and there's low entry barriers. I mean, it's very easy to get into the industry. In monopolistic competition, there are many firms. They're slightly larger. There's some pricing power that they have. The products are differentiated, and the entry barriers are somewhat medium. In oligopoly, there are few and large firms, or there are few firms and they tend to be large. They have pricing power, a differentiated product, and there are high entry barriers into that industry. And then finally, there's the monopoly, where there is one firm. There's considerable pricing power because they're the only one there, right? And there's a unique product and there are very high entry barriers. So the profit potential along this continuum goes from low all the way to high. So the more competitors, the less profit potential. And this ties into what we were saying with Porter's five forces. So, you can think of different industries where you have these different forms of competitive structures. Monopoly, you might think of Amazon. You also might as well also think of Tesla. And again, those are two of our go-to companies, right? When we think of certain examples. But those are you could very well argue that they exist in a monopolistic um, uh, industry. So industry growth. So this is something else to keep in mind with respect to external analysis. So during periods of high growth, consumer demand rises and the price competition among firms decreases. And that can be done because there's less concern about beating your competitors with price simply because the demand is so high. So the focus during high growth is on capturing new customers, and you're not focused on taking profitability away from your peer companies, your competitors. But during periods of negative growth, the rivalry is fierce, and rivals can only gain at the expense of one another. So I want you to keep this in mind for later chapters when we talk about life cycles and also, particularly here, keep in mind, and I'm going to switch to red because it's going to be easier to see. Inappropriately, I'm switching to red, but keep in mind rather, blue oceans. Uh, so exit barriers. These are the obstacles that determine how easily a firm can leave that industry. So examples would be contractual obligations. You're contractually obligated to buy certain things from suppliers. And so as a result, it's difficult to get out. And then another question is, can you liquidate your assets? And for how much can you do that? And then the book mentions emotional attachments. And I'm going to argue that this is an academic's view. And the example that the book gives is, certain automakers being wedded to, or the author argues that they're wedded to because of a long history in a certain spot to a certain city or cities. And I really think that that's just an academic's view. I think that when companies are making hard choices about whether to close a plant or whether or where to build a plant, they are emotional attachments do not enter into their decisions. So something to keep in mind. That's where I do disagree with the book. So strategic groups. These are sets of companies in an industry that pursue similar strategies. So this is lifted from the book, and here we talk about, here the book talks about the airline industry. So how do you set up like a strategic group analysis? Well, first you set up two axes, and you identify two strategic dimensions in that industry. So here we've identified price and the number of routes. And then you graph the firms on the chart, and then their market share is signified by their size. So, for example, big circles here because they have big market share, and then less big over here because their market share is smaller. But why even bother doing this? Competitive rivalries are strongest between firms in the same strategic groups. And different strategic groups are impacted differently by external factors. And this should be five forces, impact strategic groups differently. So we can, do a little, mental game of playing with how do the various pestle or elites forces affect these different strategic groups within the airline industry. And the same thing would be the five forces. How are the five forces, Porter's five forces, affecting these? So we'll talk about this in class, but food for thought. And that brings us to the end of chapter 3.